And now we want to turn to Jordan Ash and Chris Noble, who are from the Private Equity Stakeholder Project, so they can tell us more about what the private equity group is doing and give us their perspective.
Big thank you to everyone who has spoken so far. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Jordan Ash, and I am the Labor and Jobs Director at the Private Equity Stakeholder Project. There has been a huge increase in the last few years in the number of workers employed at companies owned by private equity firms, and the largest number of these workers are concentrated in low-wage industries such as food service, retail, healthcare, and security. The largest single industry is food service, with over 1.5 million jobs. About half of those food service workers are at companies owned by Work Capital, the private equity firm that Zella Roberts and Jesse Harmon talked about. After buying Dunkin' Brands, Work Capital now has close to 1 million workers at its companies and franchisees. Work Capital's food service empire also includes Arby's, Jimmy John's, Hardee's, Sonic Drive-Ins, and Buffalo Wild Wings, among others. Many of the jobs at Work Capital-owned food service companies pay an average between $10 to $12 an hour. Work has fought to keep wages low for workers. Last March, Work-owned Inspire Brands sent employees and franchisees a report bragging about its success in helping to kill the federal Raise the Wage Act, which would have raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour and would have eliminated the tip credit. Work's Inspire Brands also bragged about fighting the PRO Act, which would protect workers' right to form a union. Retail is the second largest industry, with over 1.1 million workers at private equity-owned companies. The average pay for the most common jobs at these companies is between $9 to $13 an hour. Since 2010, private equity firms and hedge funds have made substantial controlling investments in over 80 major retail companies. The largest private equity-owned employers in retail are Albertsons Safeway grocery store, where Phil Conti works with 270,000 workers, Staples, PetSmart, where Isabella Burrows works, and Michael's stores. Private equity investments in the, private equity firms have also been responsible for more than 600,000 job losses at retailers like Toys R Us, Sports Authority, and Art Van Furniture. Private equity investments in the healthcare industry have surged in recent years and continue to grow. And there are now over 800,000 people working in the US at private equity-owned healthcare companies, such as Ed Godomsky talked about. The Apollo Global Management-owned hospital system, LifePoint Health, announced that it will acquire Kindred Healthcare, which will bring LifePoint's total employees to 77,000. In 2018, KKR acquired Envision, a healthcare staffing company, which has 67,000 employees. KKR then bought Bright Spring Health Services, which provides home and community-based health services. This year, Pinta Capital Partners invested in Genesis Healthcare, taking the largest US nursing home operator private. Genesis operates more than 325 nursing homes and assisted living centers in 24 states. This past March, private equity firm Warburg Pincus purchased the security company G4S, which has over 533,000 employees worldwide. Warburg Pincus already owned the security firm Allied Universal, which has over 300,000 employees globally. Security officers at G4S and Allied Universal in the US are paid an average of between $12 and $14 an hour. In 2019, BC Partners acquired a majority stake in Garter World, which has 122,000 workers globally. Food service, retail, healthcare, and security are industries in which women and people of color are overrepresented and in which the majority of jobs pay less than $15 an hour. Food service occupations have the greatest concentration of workers making less than a $15 wage, more than half of the workers. Cashiers and retail salespeople are the two occupations that represent the greatest total number of workers making less than $15 per hour, about 5 million workers. Black and Latino workers make up a significant portion of the workforce in these industries. They make up almost half of fast food workers, almost 1/3 of retail workers, half of home care workers, hospital orderlies, and nursing assistants, and more than half of security officers. The private equity industry is playing an increasingly larger role in workers' lives and can't be ignored. Workers and the unions and organizations they are part of are figuring out different ways of taking on private equity. They are negotiating union contracts and overcoming aggressive anti-union campaigns to win new union elections. They are taking their message to pension funds and asking investors to support their fights. They are organizing with groups like United for Respect and Rock United. And they are coming together to call on the private equity industry to institute a set of standards. Your organization can sign on to demand that private equity firms improve conditions at the portfolio companies they own by paying a sustainable wage of at least $15 an hour, providing paid sick leave and affordable health care, committing to end occupational segregation, providing safe working conditions, paying severance during layoffs, and protecting workers' rights to organize. Unions, advocacy organizations, and community groups are also coming together to ask lawmakers at the state and federal levels to pass legislation to make private equity accountable to workers, like the federal Stop Wall Street Looting Act, which Senator Elizabeth Warren and others just reintroduced yesterday, and which my colleague Chris Noble will speak about now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jordan. Yes, as Jordan mentioned, Stop Wall Street Looting Act was reintroduced by Senator Warren yesterday, and the efforts at supporting this piece of legislation have been supported by our friends at United for Respect and Americans for Financial Reform. And so just a little bit about this piece of legislation. The main focuses on private equity are transparency, preventing some of the abuses that were discussed so eloquently today on this call, and making sure that private equity firms have skin in the game, for lack of a better term, when it comes to their portfolio companies. So one of the first things that we'll do is create something called joint and several liability, so that private equity firms will be on the hook for pension-related obligations, debt, legal judgments, anything that their portfolio companies might incur will also be applicable to the private equity firm. And that's important just so that their incentives will be aligned. When it comes to looting portfolio companies, this law would prohibit target firms or prohibit portfolio companies from making distributions to private equity firms within 24 months of being required. It would restrict closings and mass layoffs or outsourcing jobs within 2 years of being required by a private equity firm. So they wouldn't be able to simply come in there, acquire a company, strip it of its assets, and leave workers in the lurch. And that is very important. This act also prioritizes severance pay and other worker benefits in the event of bankruptcy. Far too often, my private equity firms are able to sort of get around that when it comes to bankruptcy, and also pay, bonuses and other kind of things to executives. In the event of bankruptcy, this legislation would put workers front and center when it comes to that process. Lastly, there's a lot of detail, and I encourage folks to read either the summaries or the bill text. But the last point I want to hammer on is transparency. Private equity is able to do a lot of things that negatively impact communities, workers, because they operate in the dark. It's a very opaque industry. And so what this bill would also do is require private equity managers to disclose fees, returns, and political expenditures so that investors can monitor their investments and shop around. So, between the transparency, the protections for workers in bankruptcy, the protections, afforded to portfolio companies so they don't get looted, and also the joint and several liability. This is a very important piece of legislation that I encourage everybody to either through your union or other avenue lobby for, so that we can sort of rein in these abuses. Thank you.